Hi everyone, today's LaserDisc is the 1994 John Waters film starring Kathleen Turner, Serial Mom, which is a hilarious, murderous satire. It stars Kathleen Turner as this wife who's trying to be this perfect, middle-class, suburban America housewife, apple pie, baseball, like this pure, perfect, utopian disaster. And she goes to extreme lengths to try and create that image. And the film works on two parts that can really break the film down into the first half that really worked for me, and the second half, which I think went a little off the rails and didn't work quite as well. Kathleen Turner is again trying to be this picture perfect, June Cleaver mom, and she, beneath the surface though, has this obsession with murder. She has this obsession with gore. She has this obsession with horror flicks, and eventually that turns into this monstrous being brewing within her that erupts in violent ways to where she actually does start murdering. Little things like her neighbor who doesn't recycle, a teacher who's a little bit hard on her son, a customer who yells at her son at work, a boyfriend who leaves her daughter hanging dry. All these different factors, these things that this mother who's trying to create this false image of this perfect little family, and in that way, anything that it obstructs that, anything that is against that image or would reflect badly against this image she's trying to create, she ends up trying to literally destroy that bit of adversity, that problem she needs to kill. And it also starts to feed upon this savage lust that's behind the surface. And her character and the way the movie is also filmed, the way everything looks, the way everything is portrayed, really works as an interesting and fascinating satire. Again, in the first part of the movie, you have as the mother is kind of coming loose, and the murderous aspects of her are finally starting to take over, and even her family is starting to realize what's happening. The police are starting to suspect her. That whole part of the story works very, very well, and eventually she is brought to trial. She's arrested and brought to trial, and when the trial comes, that's when things kind of go off the rails a bit, and to me don't quite work. They lose a little bit of its biting edge. The entire movie, it does a great job visually of showing the early 90s suburban depiction, kind of how in societally it's almost trying to mirror the way suburban America was in the 50s. There are a lot of parallels to this perfect little utopia in the early 90s, suburbia, this false image of what that is, that reflects a lot of the way society was in the 50s. And it shows how we put on these masks in society in general, that perfect image, that unattainable, bizarre, kind of like creepy Stepford wifey thing that we try to create and emulate in many ways, and that part of American society is actually just covering up all the filth that's beneath it, and all just the sin that's being covered up by this pristine image, and how ridiculous the whole thing is. And it's displayed in a way where it very cleverly mixes imagery. There are lots of little hints to the 50s, and there are lots of little color choices. There are lots of cars and the clothing and phrases that are used that are simultaneously a reference to that time period, but don't feel out of place in the early 90s setting. There are so many very clearly 90s things also thrown in there, and nothing ever clashes. It just feels like this perfect mix of those two time periods, and how they're both trying to do the same thing, trying to create this weird, bizarre, robot existence that covers up the actual humanity and the actual reality of suburban America. And that's all done very, very well, and it's balanced so well in that respect. And it's also balanced in that you're seeing so much of the story from the perspective of Kathleen Turner's character, of the mother. You're not seeing every scene directly from her perspective, but the majority of the story in the first half takes place mostly within her view of the world, even if it's not directly a scene just with her in it. And in that way, that kind of shapes that reality to where this is the fake reality we're creating, and it's also kind of, because we're seeing it mostly through her perspective, it's also the fake reality that she's creating in her mind. So that some of the things that are a little off-putting or do try, are a little like, Leave It to Beaver, that type of thing, they fit very well because it's kind of like how she's viewing the world and the world within that structure. And then as she kind of comes off the rails as it moves on, that changes, and it works very well in that kind of way. You get the introduction of the early 90s movie store and the grunge scene, and like everything kind of comes together and clicks as she falls out of this perfect little utopia that she's created in her mind, and she goes to extremes to hide her true nature and what she really wants at heart, and starts with little things like prank calling her neighbor with all kinds of dirty prank calls and things, again obviously, to murder as it goes on. And that whole thing works very well, and it's good because it's a comedy, but at first you're kind of like, it's weird the first few minutes to kind of get into the tone, because it's very tongue-in-cheek comedy. It's not uproarious, laughter. You're not going to be sitting there like, losing your mind. It's not a lot of just straight. There aren't a lot of straight jokes. It's very tongue-in-cheek. It's definitely something where the first half of this movie, directed slightly differently, would be a real horror thriller. Just a slight change to the way scenes are directed, a little bit of change to the soundtrack, just little changes, and you could be a thriller. And that's a great kind of dark, satirical, tongue-in-cheek comedy when you can do that. Like something like Heathers comes to mind, where just a slight change of tone can completely change what the movie is. And the first half, until you get to she's arrested and you get into the court case, until that point, it works incredibly well. And even the points where it is a little bit more goofy, it still is funny and doesn't seem ridiculous. It just seems kind of goofy, where she leaves during dinner one time and her family thinks she's going to kill a family friend, one of her son's friends, and so they go to his house to try and stop her, and the police are outside and they see the family, but they don't see the mom, so they follow the family, but she's actually going somewhere else to commit a different murder. And the friend happens to be home alone watching a porno, and the friend and his dad and his sister and the police and everyone are barging in, and it's something that could seem like ridiculous and something that would belong more in American Pie or something like that, but the way it's played out and the way it switches constantly between that and the actual murder scene that's happening, it still works very, very well. And that kind of gives you an idea of how the picture creates that balance, and is very, very exciting in that way. But when you get to the court scene, and eventually she ends up defending herself in court, and there are a lot of funny moments and jokes when she tries to twist people's words against them and try and show how events could be just thought of in a different perspective, to where maybe she's not the killer and you can't have this perfect little housewife. And there's some ridiculous ways where she gets into the minds of people who are making statements against her and twisting it to where it's almost against them, or they're going back on their word, and the whole thing kind of falls apart during the court case. But the problem is, during that segment, that's where it shifts from the hilarity and the skewed perspective of what early 90s suburban culture was, to make a point of what it really is beneath the surface. That kind of goes away, and it just becomes a little too goofball. And that's the brilliance of the first part of this movie, is that it didn't go that far. It didn't take that extra step to become too goofy. It wasn't just silly. It was just a lot of fun, and really had a message that didn't bash itself into your face. It was this very tongue-in-cheek humor with this subtle satire that worked well and was just enjoyable. It wasn't really preachy. It was just kind of fun. And this kind of lost it completely for me towards the end. It just became goofy, and it was still fun and it was still funny, but it lost any real bite to it. It lost that satisfying edge. The edginess was gone in the last half here, and the ending itself, to me, I was not really satisfied with. I really didn't like the way the movie ended up either. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag, to where, would I recommend this movie? Absolutely. You should see it at least once, and really, maybe the second half you won't find as disappointing as I did, but overall, like, even with that second half that I find disappointing, the first half and the movie as a whole are so enjoyable in this just ridiculous way that's completely unexpected. I really didn't know what to expect going into this. I actually thought, because I didn't look into it at all, Looking at the back, I thought maybe it was just a straight murder thriller, and then I see on the cover of the Rolling Stone review here, I'm like, okay, so it's a comedy. All right, didn't know what to expect, and took a little bit to get the ball rolling and to get the tone of it and get into the movie. And once I did, it's like, oh, this is great. So overall, a very, very enjoyable and I think kind of lost movie here in many ways. I think it's one of those that's considered a bit of a cult hit, something that's not very well remembered outside of certain circles, from my understanding. And I can see why, because not everyone's going to quite get it. It's not going to be quite to everyone's taste, and I think it's one of those movies where if you're not really enjoying the way the movie is presented and the tone that it lays out, you're not going to find it funny. And if you don't find it funny and you don't find it exciting and interesting, it's not terrifying enough to hold your interest. So it really needs those aspects. So I think it's all about whether or not you enjoy the tongue-in-cheek humor and the bloody satire. If you really get into the first maybe 20 minutes of this movie and you're really super into it, this is totally for you. And if you're a few minutes in and you're just not getting it, it might not be for you. So it's one of those where I'd recommend anyone give it a try, but I wouldn't recommend everyone, I wouldn't say that everyone's going to enjoy it. But definitely an interesting movie, and one that I just wish that the second half had played out a little bit better, and it would have risen from a good movie to an absolutely fantastic movie.